today's panel discussion. And thank you so much to the Office of Equity for putting on this summit and prioritizing this very important conversation and shining a necessary light around small and diverse businesses and equity in public spending. My name is Sarah Erdmann, and I serve as the Deputy Director at the Office of Minority and Women's Business Enterprises. So today we plan to introduce you to the Governor's Subcabinet on Business Diversity. What does that body of work do? What are we trying to achieve? And who sits and serves on the board? And we have three champions in equity work in our state that serve on the subcabinet here with us today, as well as a certified OMWBE business owner that contracts with the state and serves on the subcabinet. So I just quickly want to run down background on the subcabinet, and then we'll turn it over to the panel to share their thoughts. So spend with certified businesses shot up throughout the 80s and 90s, and it peaked right before I-200 passed in 1998. And it's been on a steady decline ever since. In the last 8 years, it has plateaued. So steady decline, and then in the last 8 years, really just plateaued. In fiscal year 22, the spend with certified minority and women-owned businesses was 2.96%. And that's with state agencies and higher education. So for state agencies, the spend was 4.54%, and with higher ed, it was 0.43%. So that's where that 2.96% average comes from. The governor recognized spending with small and diverse businesses was unacceptably low and not reflective of the availability of businesses in Washington state. And he therefore created his subcabinet on business diversity. The focus is to identify barriers, so identify the barriers and remove those barriers to ensure equitable opportunities for businesses in our state. This body is intended to drive culture change across the entire enterprise. Some agencies are doing quite well, and we have those agencies with us today, but they're in pockets, and we really need to get the good word out to other agencies so that they can follow suit. The governor appointed the following agencies to the subcabinet. So the Department of Enterprise Services serves, Department of Corrections, WashDOT, Department of Social and Health Services, Healthcare Authority, and L&I. And those 6 agencies comprise of 2/3 of the state's spending. The ethnic commissions, ORIA, OMWBE, and Commerce all serve on the subcabinet as well. The Office of Equity is a key advisor to the subcabinet, and one of their initial recommendations to the subcabinet was to use PEAR principles. And in doing so, we've strengthened the impact the subcabinet has with adding these 6 community members as voting members. The community members represent both goods and services, as well as public works, as the barriers as well as the removal of those barriers looks very differently, depending on the service that you provide. Some of the fundamental outputs that the subcabinet has created over the years is the Tools for Equity in Public Spending, which is a suite or a buffet, if you will, of strategies agencies can utilize to remove barriers to participation for minority and women-owned businesses. In addition, the subcabinet worked collaboratively with the governor's office to issue Executive Order 2201, which reinforces the use of the tools. And it has many other directives around data collection, pre-bid conferences, and outreach, just to name a few. Our governor has put us on a path to dismantle inequities in our systems and institutions, demonstrating his commitment to offering all Washingtonians full and fair access to opportunities. As we know, small businesses are the backbone of the Washington state economy. About 99.5% of our businesses in Washington state are small, and they're owned by minorities and women, as well as veterans. And that makes up just under 50% of our private workforce, and that's 1.4 million workers that small businesses contribute to our economy. So now that we know a little bit more about the subcabinet, the work that we try to achieve, and why supporting minority and women-owned businesses is important, let's hear from our panel members. So we're going to first start with Jackie Bayne, She is the Deputy Director at the Office of Equal and Civil Rights within WashDOT. Jackie's been leading this charge for over 10 years at WashDOT, and they've made a lot of improvements and increased their spend. So Jackie, you want to share a little bit about what you've done at WashDOT?
Yeah, thank you. So at the Washington State Department of Transportation in 2016, when Secretary Millar started as our Secretary of Transportation, he hired my boss, Earl Key, and they developed this plan called the State Funded Diversity Roadmap. And this roadmap kind of outlined what we were going to try and do to increase state spend with diverse firms, so businesses owned by minorities, women, and veteran-owned firms. And the first step was voluntary measures. So it included updating our minority and women's business enterprise outreach, support services, technical assistance, our inclusion plans, implementing our diverse business tracking software system. And then if we weren't going to see any progress after that point in time, we were going to move to an enforceable small and veterans business program. And this is all aligned with the governor's and Attorney General's opinion on the implementation of Initiative 200. So we're currently implementing our Small and Veterans Business Enforceable Goals program, and that has mandatory goals on it. And we also have enhanced support services and our capacity building mentorship program. And if that's not effective within the next year or so with the release of our study, we would be moving to enforceable mandatory minority and women business enterprise goals on our state contracting. We're doing this as we have the Federal Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, and we've been doing disparity studies since 2005. And on our federal side, our disparity ratio is 92.5. So 100%, you're in a perfect world and you're getting everything that every group deserves. Our federal program is at 92.5. Our last disparity study showed that we were at 22.5% on the state side. So my statistical term for that is dismal. So we implemented the roadmap as a result of that, and we've seen some progress, but I don't know if we've seen enough, and we are completing our current disparity study right now, so we should have those results by the end of the year, we're hoping. Let me see, for current participation, for our total public works, for last year, we have $1.3 billion in our total spend. With OMWBE certified firms, it was 116 million or 8.4%. And then minority owned business was 67 million. Minority women owned business was 13 million. I have difficulty reading numbers that are this big. And then women owned business was 35 million. And then Department of Veterans firms and small firms would be 33 million. So in total, our diverse firms are 150 million or 10% of our total spend. That doesn't include our procurements because we can't directly impact the policies regarding that. So that's what WashDOT itself has the authority to control. So our current goal for next year is 15.47%. We requested to actually raise that on our state contracts because I wanted to say it came in with 8% was our proposed goal, and Secretary Millar and Earl wanted to raise that in an effort to have a stretch goal. So we have our state funded roadmap. We have our new disparity study. We also, this last year, implemented a small works roster set aside program in tandem with the legislature. And so we can look at our small works roster projects before they come out. And if we want to, we can set them aside for businesses certified by OMWBE as small businesses. So it's been a really successful tool to have. And I think we've awarded quite a few prime contracts to diverse firms. We're also working on a trucking consortium because we've noticed that there's a lot of, the largest segment that has a disparity with the department is African American trucking firms. And so we've hired a contractor to help pool the resources to be competitive against some of our larger trucking organizations. Then we're also continuing to implement the capacity building mentorship program in partnership with Sound Transit, and we're considering making that a larger effort. So we've put, I think, 100 mentors and approximately 100 proteges through that, and they've had a lot of success and actually a lot of contracts awarded through it. So I think that's what we have for now. So, Sarah?
Jackie, I was just hoping to ask you a couple follow-up questions. So when you were talking about disparity ratios, 100% is on par, or everyone's getting their fair share of the pie. So I think I heard 92% is where you're at on federal contracts, and in the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, there are mandatory goals. And then I think I heard 22% is where you're at on state-funded contracts. What do you attribute the difference to? Is it the mandatory goals? Does that pretty much, okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah. So we have on our federal contracting, we have a requirement as a receipt of federal aid to implement the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. And that's what gives our office and our agency a little bit extra effort, is the enforceable Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. That program receives, I think, 19% or so is the goal, and we are very close to meeting it. So we get probably $50 million or $100 million in participation a year through that program. So it does a lot of good. However, having new firms break into that market is somewhat difficult. So that's why we're kind of leading some of the efforts with the governor's subcabinet on business diversity, is we have all this history with disparity studies, with ratios, with enforceable goals, with lawsuits and things of that nature. So we have a more room to grow in that area. Yeah.
And then, Jackie, I think I also heard you mention for the last year or so, you've had enforceable goals for small business on your project. So, and that's been working. Have you seen, or tell me, has it been working? And what does working mean? Does that mean more small businesses getting work? Does that include minority and women-owned businesses? Can you share just a little bit more?
Okay, so with the Small and Veterans Business Enforceable Goals program, we have had it for a year or two. It was a pilot before then. And in that program, we've seen an increase in small business participation, but it had the inverse impact. So we implemented it hoping people would use more diverse firms. And they didn't. They used more small firms that were registered in webs that happened to be registered as small. So there's no monitoring and enforcement mechanisms of that registration process. And so while we're developing the rules for the mandatory and enforceable minority and women's business enterprise program, we're also switching that certification to point to the Office of Minority and Women's Business Enterprises, because that registration process just isn't really sufficient for the level of fraud and oversight that we have on our agreements.
Thank you very much, Jackie. So let's hear from Malcom now, Mr. Waters. Mr. Waters owns a small certified business in Washington State called Ovation Technologies LLC. Mr. Waters has significant corporate experience working for companies like Pepsi-Cola. I need to check my notes here because there were many: AOL, Market Star, and then assisting clients like Hewlett Packard and Intel. And so Mr. Waters comes with extensive corporate experience, put that into his business here in Washington State, which is now an international business, and serves as a community member on the Subcabinet for Business Diversity. So Malcom has been able to break through some barriers in Washington State, has contracted with some agencies, and has also faced significant barriers. So do you want to talk a little bit about the successes you've had and also some barriers that you've seen in Washington State?
Thank you for this opportunity again. So some of the successes that we've had over the last 10 years is obviously being able to get on state contract. There are several state contract vehicles in the state of Washington, and many of them do present barriers on gaining access to those contracts, but we've been able to um, break through those barriers and get on those contracts. And a lot of the business opportunities that state agencies use to make purchases are often off of the state contract. So there's a big advantage of being on those contracts in order to make it easier for the states to do business with you. Some of the biggest barriers, though, is getting access to those contracts. They're very, very difficult to do, and it takes a lot of work between not only the agency itself, but just the contract vehicle and where the vehicle originated from, out of what state. So it takes quite a bit of effort to get that done. We've been doing it now for. It took us almost 10 years to accomplish that. So, but we're certainly here now. The other biggest barrier that I think is, and I know that the cabinet or WAMB had some input on the direct buy, and I think the direct buy was a lot lower before and raised. But I also think that one of the barriers with that is as you get into more complex problems or bigger solutions with minority companies, you can very easily get past a direct buy spend pretty easily, and that limits the agency for having the ability, if you aren't already on state contract, to be able to utilize your firm. So I think that's some of the things that holds. I know it was well intentioned, and I appreciate the value that folks put in to get it to 40,000. But I think it also limits bigger companies or companies that have bigger solutions ability to utilize that goal.
Mhm. You know, maybe that's a topic for subcabinet to bring up. What are the direct buy limits? What what could they be raised to? And then I know that data always comes up. So how do we know if we raise the limit, or now that it's been raised, that it's been effective in more inclusion for minority and women-owned businesses? Or are those contracts still going to the same folks that perhaps the state has always done business with? Just be interested to kind of look at the numbers and figure out what the amount should be, and has it been working over the last 3-4 years since DES raised the limit?
Well, that's, it's funny you say that because that's one of our specialties. We do quite a bit of work on the data analytics side. We have SMEs, several SMEs are part of our team, subject matter experts, and we build dashboards and specifically look at projects that talks about the data and track spend and minority spend and veteran spend. And so we certainly love to have that conversation.
Yeah. So Malcolm, you mentioned that it took almost 10 years or about 10 years to get on one of those statewide contracts. Is that because you bid several times and were not awarded? Is that because that was the first opportunity to bid before it became available? Maybe a combination of both. And there's a two-part here. So you might be referring to NASBO contracts, like
exactly.
You said, those
sure.
are not necessarily always originating in our state.
That is correct.
And so how do we even get on one of those NASBO contracts if you are in Washington?
So that's the mystery, right? and that's the learning experience, right? So when we first were exposed to NASBO, and it's called the NASBO Value Point Master Contract. Um, there wasn't any really direction, right? So you talk to the state agency, and the state agency says, "Well, before we even have a conversation with you, because you might have something we want to buy." But we don't want to have a conversation with you because if you have something we want to buy and you're not on NASBO, we can't do business. So they won't even engage in the conversation. So obviously that took us to, okay, well, what is this NASBO thing? And how do we figure out how to get on this contract? So we reached out to NASBO. And NASBO said, well, you got to go back to your state and ask your state tell your state you want to get on the NASBO. So the irony of it is we spent several years just trying to figure out who owned the contract, who made those type of decisions, and then to set up meetings with those folks. And then once we did, it sort of began to start moving, but a little slow. And then we ran into the next roadblock was, well, the state was saying, we would love to put you on NASPO, but you got to go back to the manufacturer. The manufacturer has to approve you to be on NASPO. So I come from corporate, so that'll be easy. I know these guys, so but it wasn't, right? So in order to get on NASPO through a lot of the OEMs, there's a lot of what they're looking for is what type of volume of business you're going to do, who's your customers and who you're talking to. And hopefully you're talking to customers that we aren't already talking to. So they want to look for what we call as evergreen. So new business opportunities. So what is the partner bringing to the table that the OEM isn't already exposed to? So it took some time to figure it out, but we finally are there. And I mentioned this earlier, the uniqueness of it. Sometimes, it's funny because I don't realize some of the stuff that we actually pull off as a small company. But, I remember one of the meetings we were having with, I think DES, and we were looking at some of the contracts we pulled out NASPO specifically. And we were looking at NASPO, and we were looking at one of the OEMs, I won't mention which one. And we're looking at all of the authorized partners that are able to sell that particular OEM. And, I see Deloitte, and I see, SHI and CDW and CenturyLinks, and these are multi-billion-dollar companies. And then I see Ovation, and I just chuckle because I can't believe that we're actually there. But, it can happen. You just cannot give up. You certainly have to keep asking a lot of questions and pushing, but if there's something that another company wants to do and they want to reach out to me and talk about it, I'll be glad to share that information.
Sounds like tenacity, not giving up, but 10 years is a long time to get on the statewide contract. And so it sounds like you are receiving business from that statewide contract now, though. And so that 10 years.
As much as we like.
Okay. There can always be more. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing, Malcom. So let's talk to Traci Fuller with Department of Corrections. Traci has over 20 years of experience pushing diversity and equity initiatives forward, and has really propelled DOC's efforts and gained some good momentum. And she has a couple stories to share with us. These stories are things that you can do in your agencies. You can replicate these. You can pilot different opportunities, maybe tweak, because we know that agencies buy different things. But there's a lot you can learn from Traci. And so just excited to introduce you and hear what you have to say.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. I was thinking, did I turn this off? Okay. Okay, yes. So it is actually several stories, but I always like to start off to think about just all of the locations we have. We have over 11 locations. We are in 75 different areas throughout the state that provide goods and services. And we have 27 procurement professionals that do this work. And one thing is really realizing just how much work your procurement professionals do. And it truly is a lot, and seeing what can you do to make it easier for them and figuring out our way to tell our story. And one of the ways we were able to tell our story was a dashboard. And I'm just so excited because this support came from Ovation. And when I first met Ovation, it was probably on some other products, computer products that we're looking for. But I can remember the time asking Ovation about, hey, let me learn a little bit more about your company. And just to my surprise, let me back up a little bit, searching around for a dashboard just throughout the state who had something that we can use. Well, Ovation definitely had it. And what made them different was the expertise. They came with this expertise to help us tell the story down to the production level. It got a chance to show us what we were doing for minority and diverse businesses, for veteran-owned businesses. And it showed us just what we needed to do. In all of those locations, we were able to see what was happening over at WCC or just any of those locations. And I can tell you, it truly worked. And one of the great surprise, we had one location that for their minority goals for Office of Minority Women in Business Enterprise goals was over 18%. And that was huge. Using this dashboard, we can literally even our other facilities can see, because maybe they can use this as a tool, and it truly really works. And I can tell you, just through the goals of the executive order and supporting this, it becomes bigger to us than the executive order and then the policy, because it's about those small and diverse veteran-owned businesses. And those businesses, those are our neighbors. Those are our community members. And so when we went around talking to all our all our procurement professionals, all of our leaders that had delegated authority, superintendents and all, one of the questions that we asked them was, what do you know about supporting these businesses? What is your knowledge of all of this? And all of them had something to say. They wanted to support those businesses, those small businesses. And that really meant a lot. And that really gave us that drive to do something. So we truly take this serious. And even in our outreach, when we outreach, we don't just go out and outreach, we strategically, and we follow up with each person. How can we help you? If you're not getting something, how can we help you take you to the next step? Because for us as an organization in our communities, it's really important to help these businesses where we have facilities, building it strong, because this is about their livelihood. When we look at the bigger thing, if one suffers, we all suffer. So building up this community and helping economic freedom really means a lot to us at DLC. That is truly the bottom line. And this dashboard has really helped us. We're looking at the next phase, and the next step is to be able to hold ourselves accountable, because the dashboard gives us visibility. It also gives accountability to each facility. If we're not doing it, why not? And we can see it. And then teams can also meet with this and say, hey, this is what we need to do better. We did it over here. And then also figuring out a way not to keep using the same business, sharing the wealth in Washington. And that has really been a strength, because it's just not something to do. It's the right thing to do to help strengthen our communities. And that's what it's about for us in the Department of Correction, is strengthening the communities, and especially where we have facilities.
I'll just share a story really quickly before we move on to Monika. So over the summer, our director, Leica Fernandez, she toured Eastern and Central Washington, and she met a number of business owners, obviously, while she was over there. And one business owner was a bookstore. And it's like, what? The state? But yes, the state buys books. Department of Health, I believe it was, had just purchased 1,000 books from this bookstore. And the owner shared with Leica that the local schools needed science books. And so they reinvested in their community. So, Department of Health purchased those 1,000 books. That bookstore then purchased books for their local schools. So when we talk about strengthening our communities, these are the stories we're talking about. Small business reinvests, they support each other. And so when we're talking about, building up our economy and so everyone can thrive, these are just examples, small example, but it really does make a difference. And I love that the dashboard can compare the 17 facilities, I think you said. Yeah.
And 75 different locations, but you can really see it just exactly. And for the facilities that may not have any large numbers, those are like areas in rural areas. Mm-hmm. It is some areas with really small businesses, but they're businesses in Washington that count. So we're finding out ways to partner with those businesses, partner with APACs, that used to be PPAC, but partner with the chambers, those local chambers, to see how can we help build those communities and get the needs that they need, because they're part of us too. So we can't forget about the very small businesses in the rural areas.
Yeah. And I imagine sometimes Department of Corrections needs quick response. And if you don't have someone local, it's not going to be a quick response. And so that service delivery, what you get in return to having that kind of attention matters. And I think we were talking earlier, that's kind of invaluable. How do you put a price tag to that? Because when you need it, you need it. So yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. So we'll move on to Monika Vasil. Monika has been a member of the Subcabinet since inception in 2015, public servant in the state of Washington since 2006, heads up many divisions within DSHS, but in particular, Director of Contracts and Procurement. Monika, in a former life, was a practicing attorney with 2 law firms and received her law degree from Yale University. So Monika, you want to share a little bit about your perspectives on Subcabinet, where we've been, where we're going, and some of the really great initiatives that you've led at DSHS.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate being invited to participate on this panel, and just want to also say I do appreciate the Office of Equity for putting together this conference. It's I don't know how many years it's been going on. Well, as long as the Office of Equity, anyway. And it's always been very inspirational, and I find it really engaging. So I work, as Sarah mentioned, I work with the Department of Social and Health Services. It is the largest state agency, not including institutions of higher education, of course. We employ about 18,000 people, and we provide services across the entire state to around 2 million people of Washington state. And those services include things like shelter care, protection, support, economic supports, food support, TANF, SNAP benefits, mental health assistance, developmental disability assistance, care for elderly and aging populations. And we sort of put all of this under the umbrella of what we call vulnerable people in our state. And so our mission is to serve people who are vulnerable within the state and to ensure that those people in our state are getting the social supports and care that they need in their life during difficult times. And because of that, it is a really fundamental part of our agency's mission that we actively advance principles of equity, diversity, access, and inclusion. It is integral to what our mission is. And so we have been committed to increasing business opportunities for diverse service providers and suppliers for a long time. That doesn't mean we've been as successful at it as we would have liked. Hearing, some of the numbers from WashDOT, for instance, I'm a little embarrassed in comparison. But I will note that part of what you look at when you look at these numbers is we're all sort of measuring different things in a lot of senses. Each of the different state agencies has its own different mission. And so while I talk about what is the mission of my agency, the Department of Transportation has a different mission in terms of ensuring people being able to move around the state without problems. Department of Corrections is ensuring that their populations are taken care of and, receiving basic needs and hopefully rehabilitation within the prison system. And every single agency is sort of tasked with a particular mission that it is, charged with accomplishing. And because of that, we do have very, very different focuses sometimes, and we do spend things on different things. So my agency, I think spends billions of dollars on direct care for the clients that we serve. When you look at what is being measured for diverse business spend, it is a small portion of that. It is somewhere around, I guess, in fiscal year 2022, our agency spent upwards of $323 million on goods and services. So that's just a portion of what the spending is for the agency overall. And then when you look at what our spend percentages are, they are not where we would like them to be. So the last measure that we had was again for fiscal year 2022, and that was at 1.73%. That's kind of dismally low. And yet when you look at what was our spend during that same time frame with small businesses, it was up at almost 10%. So we do have, a certain amount of I guess, ability to spend money with small businesses. I don't know why more of that is not being directed towards diverse businesses. And part of the reason I don't know that leads back to what Traci was talking about is that a lot of agencies don't really have good insight into where the spend is going. What is it being spent on? Where do you see it making a difference? Where is that 1.73%? What is that going to purchase? We don't know. And so one of the things that we've been able to do and that we're working on now, we're behind Department of Corrections on this, but we are working on also creating a dashboard to be able to show all of our programs and our people in real time where we're at with our diverse spend. And our initial goal with that is to be able to basically show the numbers that are reported by OMWBE. But beyond that, we would like to be able to tell the story of our agency more than just what is our spend with the certified businesses that are counted by OMWBE. We would like to also be able to show, for instance, of all of those billions of dollars of client services, how much of those dollars go to diverse businesses or business owners or diverse, licensees of adult care homes, things like that. So to us, there's a bigger story, and this is part of it, and it's an important part, but it also isn't the whole story. And I think that goes for many different agencies. So, the Washington Department of Transportation has, the federal funds, and they have their requirements for that. And we have our state funds and we have our requirements for that. Our goal going forward this year is to hit 5.7% of diverse spend. Honestly, that is going to be a stretch goal for us because the tools that we have available to influence that number, they are pretty much the same tools that we've had over the past decade. And although we are consistently trying to implement new things and add new tools to the toolbox and take away barriers, it doesn't happen quickly. And I don't always see a huge impact from those particular things that we're doing. I wish they would have greater impact. But, even with Department of Transportation, we see that the real difference is in whether it's required by the federal government or not. And so the whole state is still in that same boat of we're all under Initiative 200, and we are not allowed to give preferences on the basis of race or gender to public spend, to our contracting opportunities. And so everything that we try to do is within that constraint. And that's a challenge that all of the agencies are facing. We're all facing it together. There is a roadmap that was essentially created by this subcabinet when it was convened, and that it has been working on for some time. And it involves potentially ultimately moving towards mandatory goals and requirements to contract with diverse businesses. I very much look forward to that day because I think that's going to be really critical for us to actually see better equity in state spend. That said, in the meantime, and I know we're out of time here, but so I'll wrap this up. In the meantime, our agency, just like the other agencies, we are all trying to do what we can. within the constraints that we operate within. And they are very complicated. So, you hear Malcolm talking about the NASPO contract. So like that's one contract vehicle, but there's like 5 or 6 different potential ways to contract. There's public works, and then there's goods and services. There's competitive procurement processes, and then there's direct buys. And sometimes you can do a sole source, and you have to use the Department of Enterprise Services contract if it exists. But if it doesn't exist, then you have to do a competitive solicitation. It is very, very complicated. And within that, there are many, many people, just as Traci described, in every agency who are really, truly committed to doing what we can to try to remove the barriers, to make it easier to do business with the state, and to make the entire process more equitable. And we still have a long ways to go, which means there's still a lot of work to be done. But I do see progress in the time that I've been involved with this work. I'm very proud of the Subcabinet putting forward Executive Order 2201 that the governor signed. I'm very proud of the work that the Subcabinet did to bring that forward, and that our state has, our governor signed that, and that is now in place. And my hope with that was that we would see it as an anchor for more agencies to be able to rely on that to say, this is important. We need to be doing this work. And if you don't think so, well, I'm sorry, it's directed. So we need to be doing that work, and we need to keep doing it. There's a lot more to do, but we can make progress, and we have to keep following that roadmap if we're going to get to the point where we can say, yes, now we have enough data to prove that we're not going to move this needle without having, mandatory goals or requirements to do this type of contracting. And in the absence of that, what we have is a system that is discriminatory in its impact, which is against the law. And so right now we have, you can't have preferences, but if the impact of that is that you have a discriminatory system, that its impact is, unnecessarily discriminatory towards groups, and there's a disparity there, which is what the disparity studies are about, that's also not allowed. So we have to follow this legal roadmap to get where we're going. We're on the path there. Going to need to do another disparity study, I think, soon. And in the meantime, we're going to have to continue to do the work to get the measurements correct, get the data that we need, and to continue to do everything else that we can do in our toolbox to move ourselves forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Monika. Do we have a little bit more time, or are we out of time? We're out of time. Okay. Thank you.